My name is Avery Cole. I am 37 years old, and my mother has never once, in 12 full years, typed the name of my company into a search engine, not even out of idle curiosity, not even in the quiet hours she spent managing everyone else's calendar with the devotion of a full-time administrator. Yet she kept a color-coded digital schedule of my sister Brooke's professional life synchronized to her phone like a civic document requiring daily maintenance. I run Meridian Group, a luxury brand strategy and corporate identity consulting firm in Denver, which generated over $4 million in audited revenue last year with 23 full-time employees on payroll. And yet, on the very morning after I closed a $600,000 contract with a global hotel chain, the single largest milestone in my company's 12-year history, my mother called me to the house, handed me a handwritten Post-it note with a 30-minute turkey basting schedule, and told me my sister was simply far too overwhelmed with year-end corporate reports to be expected to manage Christmas dinner on top of all of that. Because Brooke's VP of Marketing title at my father's firm, a position Grant had placed on her desk the way you place a ribbon on a gift, with ceremony and without any requirement that it be earned, was a real and protected professional obligation, while my company was something that could wait indefinitely without consequence. That Post-it note was the last in 15 years of accumulated invisible labor. And this is the story of what happened the day I finally put it down. If you have ever felt like the invisible engine in a room full of people who should have seen you, this story is for you. And I want you to hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're listening from. I read every single one. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Now let me take you back. To understand the end of this story, you have to begin at the beginning. And the beginning was the winter of 2009, when I was 22 years old, a fresh graduate from the University of Denver with a communications degree that felt, in the paralyzed center of the Great Recession, like a beautifully framed document with no practical application in the world as it had actually become that year. The economy flatlined, the housing market detonated in everyone's face simultaneously, and I moved back into my childhood bedroom in the Cole estate, a 6,000 square foot craftsman in one of Denver's most coveted gated communities, firing resumes into a digital vacuum that produced no response across 3 consecutive months. The house smelled of fresh-cut Douglas fir, boutique cinnamon candles Diana had discovered at a Vail holiday market, and the particular atmospheric weight of generational expectations. My mother had redecorated every surface with restoration hardware garlands and hand-painted porcelain ornaments she handled with more deliberate tenderness than she had ever directed at her eldest daughter. 15 guests were scheduled for the Christmas Eve dinner that year. Grant's senior law partners from Cole & Associates, 2 venture capital contacts he had been cultivating quietly for months, and the kind of Denver social architecture that required a flawless production to sustain its impression. My mother walked into the kitchen on the morning of the 23rd, looked me directly in the eye with the smooth, unbothered efficiency of someone executing an administrative task, and said, "Avery, you're managing the entire menu this year." Not as a request, not as something requiring my acknowledgement, but with the cool certainty of someone assigning a duty to a resource that had no competing claim on its own time. I looked up from my laptop, where I had been carefully editing a cover letter for a junior communications role closing at midnight, and said carefully, "The entire dinner? For 15 people?" Diana glanced toward the living room, where Brooke, 18 years old, a freshman at CU Boulder, draped across the velvet sectional in a cashmere hoodie, was scrolling through social media with the focused intensity of someone cataloging a life she was certain would arrive on its own. Brooke has her academic priorities, my mother said, without making eye contact. I won't have her concentration broken by kitchen logistics. I pointed out, as evenly as I could manage, that I also had a professional deadline before midnight. Diana's voice sharpened in the particular way that indicated the conversation had already concluded in her mind before she'd spoken its first sentence. This is about the Cole name, Avery. The family's social standing doesn't pause for entry-level job applications. That was the first clear signal. Brooke's trajectory was a family asset worth protecting at any cost. And my professional future was an inconvenience to be arranged around the household's actual priorities. I spent the following 48 hours effectively anchored to the granite countertops, roasting a 14-pound heritage turkey, hand-mashing Yukon Gold potatoes with truffle butter, assembling a green bean casserole with hand-fried shallots, laminating brioche dinner rolls, and constructing 3 scratch pies while the living room filled with the sound of Brooke's laughter and a television running a holiday film that no one was watching with real attention. I set the table with obsessive architectural precision, polishing the full sterling silver service until my wrists ached, hand calligraphing place cards in copperplate script, aligning each element with the understanding that the difference between a good experience and a memorable one lives entirely in details most people never consciously register. When Christmas Eve arrived and the first guests filtered through the heavy craftsman doors, I was still tucked in the pantry, my cashmere sweater streaked with gravy, invisible in the infrastructure of an event I had built entirely alone. My father stood in the foyer with a crystal tumbler of Blanton's, guiding Richard Whitmore, his primary business partner, toward Brooke with the pride of a man presenting his life's most significant professional achievement. This is my youngest, studying strategic communications at CU, a natural for the firm one day. I walked past them carrying a heavy silver platter of roasted fig and prosciutto crostini I had assembled by hand, and Grant's eyes moved across me for a fraction of a second with the brief, unfocused quality of someone registering a piece of furniture they had stopped consciously noticing, and then returned to Richard without a word, without any indication that the person carrying the platter was his daughter. That was the second signal. Brooke was the brand, the investment, the story the family had committed to telling. I was the background infrastructure that kept that story running smoothly enough that no one had to think about it. The dynamic locked into ritual over the years that followed. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve, the annual Whitmore Charity Gala at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, every milestone birthday dinner. I was the invisible logistics coordinator who arrived early and left late, who knew the precise resting temperature of a prime rib and the exact cornstarch ratio that would hold a 3-hour gravy service, while Brooke sat at the table, was introduced to the guests, was praised for her instincts and her poise, in a pattern so entrenched it had stopped requiring any active decision-making and had simply become the structure of the thing, permanent and unquestioned. When Claire Whitmore, Richard's wife, a woman with a genuine eye for quality, picked up one of my stuffed mushroom caps glazed in aged Gruyere at the 2010 Christmas dinner and said with real feeling, "Whoever made these could run a serious operation," Diana waved a dismissive hand and said, "That's just Avery. She has plenty of time for kitchen projects and she's still finding her professional footing." I was already billing 3 simultaneous consulting contracts at rates that would have recalibrated every assumption in the room. But in Diana Cole's taxonomy, nothing counted until it came with institutional validation she could reference at a dinner table without explanation. By 2012, I had stopped waiting for permission that was never going to arrive and quietly built Meridian Group from the ground floor up, positioning it at the precise intersection of brand strategy and experiential corporate identity, constructing the first operational version for my apartment kitchen table with a single laptop and the professional instincts I had cultivated across 3 years of invisible household labor. When I mentioned the company to Diana once, she was deep in Architectural Digest and didn't look up when she said, "Brand consulting? Like designing logos for small local businesses?" I explained that it was enterprise-level corporate identity strategy for companies navigating growth, acquisition, and market expansion. She turned a page. "That's sweet, dear. Can you drop my dry cleaning off on your way back from the florist tomorrow?" She never raised the subject again, and neither did Grant, and neither did Brooke. And so after that single, carefully chosen attempt, I stopped offering information to people who had demonstrated, with thorough reliability, that they were not prepared to receive it in good faith. I built Meridian Group entirely inside the clean, clarifying absence of their interest, which turned out to be the most structurally sound condition I could have operated in. It stripped away every instinct to perform for their validation and forced me to build entirely for the substance and integrity of the work itself. By 2014, I had signed my first significant enterprise client, a tech company out of Austin contracting Meridian Group for $45,000 to reconstruct their full brand architecture ahead of a national product launch. And by 2018, I had 14 full-time employees and a sun-filled open-plan office in Denver's Rhino Arts District, with a client list that had expanded to include regional financial institutions, luxury hospitality groups, and mid-size pharmaceutical companies managing complex post-merger identity transitions. By the close of fiscal year 2024, Meridian Group was generating $4.2 million in audited annual revenue, with 23 people on payroll and a 91% client retention rate. But every time I visited the Cole estate, I came in neutral jeans and a plain sweater, drove my Honda rather than the custom Range Rover in my building's parking structure, and never mentioned the revenue figure that would have recalibrated every assumption everyone in that house had been caring about me for over a decade. I want to pause here for just a moment. If you've ever deliberately hidden your success from people who should have been your biggest supporters, drop a comment right now and tell me why. And hit that like button if this story is landing somewhere real for you. Let's keep going. The Thanksgiving of 2024 was the accumulation point, where 15 years of small, precise cruelties reached a mass that could no longer be absorbed. I had, just 4 days before that dinner, closed the largest single contract in Meridian Group's 12-year history, a $600,000 brand architecture engagement with a global hotel chain expanding their Western U.S. presence, a deal requiring 6 months of strategic positioning and 3 competitive presentation rounds against firms twice our size. I arrived at the Cole estate carrying a bottle of 2019 Napa Valley Cabernet and the private, uncelebrated knowledge of what I had just accomplished. Diana met me at the door, registered the wine with a glance, and placed a stained apron over my forearm the way you hang a coat on a hook, without ceremony, without eye contact, without acknowledging that she was handing it to a person rather than a fixture. She pulled a Post-it note from the inside pocket of her blazer and pressed it into my palm with the efficient finality of someone completing an administrative task. "The turkey needs basting every 30 minutes. I've made a schedule." 23 people reported to me every morning. I had just negotiated a $600,000 contract with a global hospitality company's senior leadership team, and my mother had printed a basting schedule on a yellow Post-it and handed it to me like a shift assignment. I took the apron. I basted the turkey on schedule. I served Thanksgiving dinner to 18 people while Brooke occupied the table's prime position and narrated, with the natural confidence of someone who has never questioned her right to the spotlight, the brutal pressure of her role as VP of Marketing at Colin Associates, a position Grant had assigned to her with the casual generosity with which he had always transferred value in her direction, without audition or competition. "Revenue is up 14% this quarter," Grant said, directing the full warmth of his professional pride at his youngest daughter. I could have mentioned that Meridian Group's revenue was up 38% year over year, without a single dollar of family safety net. But I had played the Cole family response out enough times in my own mind to know precisely how it would land. They would compress a mountain into a molehill with the practiced efficiency of people who had been performing that particular reduction for over a decade. After dinner, elbow deep in soapy water at the kitchen sink, scrubbing the Le Creuset Dutch oven from a meal I had barely tasted, I made a decision that had the quality not of a resolution, but of a natural terminus. This was the last holiday I would spend as the invisible infrastructure of a family that had never, in 15 years, thought to ask what I was building when I left the house. I drove back that evening to my own loft, a 2-bedroom industrial space in Denver's low-high neighborhood, with exposed century-old brick and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Rockies, a home my family had never once visited because in 15 years of proximity, not one of them had ever thought to ask for the address. And I sat in the quiet dark with a glass of wine and let the decision settle into my body like something that had finally found its permanent resting place. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of December, my entire professional trajectory pivoted on a single email that arrived at 9:47 a.m. I was in my corner office at Meridian Group, watching a late-season snowstorm move across the Denver skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass, my desk layered in brand briefs and a double espresso that had gone cold during a vendor call. Marcus Webb, my COO and the operational backbone of Meridian Group since its 2nd year, 51 years old, with the calm, unshakable steadiness of a man who had navigated 3 market downturns without losing his loyalty to the firm, knocked on my glass door with the specific, measured rhythm he reserved for information that required my undivided attention, and set a tablet on my desk without preamble. The screen displayed an email from Victoria Harlan, CEO of Harlan Collective, a luxury hospitality and residential development empire with a verified portfolio valuation of $3.8 billion, one of the most demanding institutional clients in the American luxury sector. The subject line was surgical: partnership proposal, exclusive brand strategy services, 2025. I read the entire email twice before I allowed my pulse to respond. Harlan Collective wanted to negotiate an exclusive, full-year contract with Meridian Group to manage the complete brand identity strategy, experiential positioning, and communications framework for their entire North American portfolio. Luxury residential developments in 3 coastal markets, high-end corporate retreat properties, and blue-chip investor summits in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. They had conducted a discreet 6-month independent evaluation of our firm's operational history, consulted our Fortune 500 references directly without our knowledge, and concluded that Meridian Group's approach to strategic brand authenticity and sustainable luxury positioning was the precise methodological fit for their 2025 expansion goals. The proposed contract value was $2.1 million annually, with a 3-year renewal option as a standing condition of execution. "Is this real?" I said, and my voice landed at a register that had no business appearing in my professional vocabulary. Marcus had the quiet, gathered expression of a man who had been waiting years for this particular delivery. I spoke with their general counsel this morning before bringing this to you, he said. It's fully verified and legitimate. He paused, with the deliberate weight of someone who understood the structural significance of what he was about to introduce. There is one non-negotiable condition. Victoria Harlan does not execute seven-figure commitments with people she hasn't evaluated directly. She needs to sit across from the architect of the brand before she applies a signature to anything. He held the pause precisely long enough for its weight to land. The meeting is set for December 24th at 11 a.m. at Harlan Collective's global headquarters in Miami, Brickell. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The calendar date on which Diana Cole's annual kitchen assignment would normally begin arriving in my phone at 8 in the morning. Can we push to January? Marcus shook his head with the patient certainty of someone who had already pursued that avenue. Victoria boards her private flight to Aspen on the 26th. If the contract isn't executed by Christmas Eve, they move to Pinnacle Creative. Pinnacle Creative was Meridian Group's most aggressively positioned competitor in the Denver market, built on social media volume and systematic talent poaching that had spent 2 years attempting to erode our client base. If they landed Harlan Collective, the signal to the industry would be immediate and unambiguous. That Meridian Group had encountered the ceiling of its ambition and blinked. Closing Harlan Collective meant we were no longer a leading regional firm. It would make Meridian Group a nationally recognized brand architecture powerhouse with the kind of anchor client that opened simultaneous doors in Chicago, New York, and the entire Southeast Corridor. There was one more element in the email, a single highlighted paragraph that stopped the air in my chest for a full count of 3. Victoria had written, I was profoundly impressed by your profile in the October issue of Forbes' Brand Architects Power List. Your philosophy on sustainable luxury identity strategy aligns precisely with our 2025 ESG objectives. I look forward to meeting the mind behind Meridian Group. The Forbes feature had published in October, a 4,000-word profile that described me as a quiet architectural force reshaping how American corporations construct and defend their public identity in a market that rewards authenticity over performance. I had never mentioned that article to Diana, Grant, or Brooke because I had calculated the Montgomery response in advance. Diana would critique the photograph, Grant would ask whether the revenue figures had been independently verified by a credentialed firm, and Brooke would produce something that sounded vaguely congratulatory, but was structured at its foundation as a deflation. So I had kept that issue in the bottom drawer of my executive desk like a private document, a proof of concept I carried alone, for no audience other than my own certainty on the days when certainty required reinforcement. But Victoria Harlan had found it, read it, and determined it was worth $2.1 million a year. Book the flight, I said, and every gram of indecision dissolved completely and permanently. As if on cue, my phone buzzed against the desk with a text from Diana. 3 words. Call me. Now. In the Cole family's communication lexicon, now had never, in 15 years, been attached to a genuine celebration of my life. It was attached, with unerring consistency, to a request that required my labor, my presence, or my role as structural support in someone else's plan. 15 years of psychological conditioning does not dissolve because of a Forbes profile, and the part of me that had spent an entire childhood hoping for a single authentic expression of parental recognition picked up the phone before the more calibrated part of my brain could intervene. Diana answered before the first ring completed. "Finally," she said, her voice carrying the brittle, charged edge of someone who had been sitting with an unissued directive for longer than she considered acceptable. I kept my voice level and neutral. The tone I had refined across thousands of boardroom conversations into something that communicated engagement without vulnerability. The Christmas Eve plans have expanded. 25 guests total. Brooks' Junior League Circle and Grant's new venture partners. I need you at the house no later than 8 a.m. tomorrow. Full production, catering oversight, floral arrangements, table architecture, the complete scope. Brooke is completely overwhelmed with the firm's fourth quarter close and cannot be expected to manage domestic coordination on top of that. There it was, delivered with the efficient inevitability of a standing organizational policy. Brooke's professional obligations at a firm she had not built and could not lose were a legitimate reason for exemption from any household contribution, while my company was something that could be paused at will. "Mother, I can't be there tomorrow. I have a business meeting that cannot be moved." "A business meeting on Christmas Eve," she said, and the brief dismissive laugh that followed was the one she reserved for things she had decided in advance not to take seriously. "What kind of meeting?" "A closing in Miami, a contract worth over $2 million. A genuine stunned silence. And then the laugh returned, its cruelest version, communicating not merely disbelief but contempt for the audacity of the claim itself. "Avery, I am going to say this plainly because someone in your life needs to say it. You are a brand consultant. You make slide decks and style guides for companies that cannot figure out their own logo. You are not a CEO. You are not an industry titan. You are 37 years old, you are alone, and you have spent 12 years chasing professional validation instead of building a life that actually means something. And when your family needs you, you always find a reason to be somewhere else." Something in the load-bearing architecture of my patience gave way quietly, without drama, and completely. "You have no idea what I do," I said, and my voice arrived with the cold, absolute certainty of a fact that had always been true and was now simply being stated without apology for the first time. The silence that followed was dense and pressurized, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the measured quality of someone who has decided to stop managing and start landing blows. "If you walk out on this family on Christmas Eve, Avery, do not bother coming back." I held that sentence for exactly one breath, felt its full weight, assessed its structural integrity, allowed it to mean precisely what it meant. And then I felt something I had not been prepared to feel. Relief. Deep and clean and unprecedented. "Goodbye, Mother." I ended the call. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've ever had to choose between the weight of someone else's expectations and the full weight of your own future, hit that like button right now and drop a comment. What would you have done in my position? Now let me take you to Miami. I sat at my desk for a long, still moment with the phone warm in my palm, and Marcus walked in without being asked and took the chair across from me with the natural authority of someone who understood when presence was the right language. "She told me not to come back if I chose Miami," I said. He was quiet with the patient weight of a man measuring his words against the magnitude of the moment. "I have watched you build this firm from a single client and a legal pad. I have been in rooms where you held your ground against global CEOs without losing your footing once. But every time you walk into that house, you allow them to reduce you to something that hasn't existed for a very long time. You can keep fitting yourself into the shape they require, or you can step entirely into the architecture you built with your own hands. You cannot sustain both simultaneously. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Brooke. Mom is in tears right now. Really couldn't put the family first for one single day? Classic. I read it once, in full, without composing a response, deleted the thread, blocked the number without ceremony, and looked at Marcus with the clean, settled certainty of a decision that had already been made. Have the driver ready for DIA at 7, I said. I'm going to Miami. That evening, I packed a Toomey carry-on with surgical precision. A charcoal power suit tailored on a business trip to Milan the previous spring, my MacBook Pro, the full Harlan briefing package, and one final item placed on top with a deliberateness I recognized as ritual rather than practicality. The October issue of Forbes, folded to page 47, where a headline read, "Quiet Architecture: How Avery Cole Built a Brand Strategy Empire by Refusing to Ask for Permission." I wasn't entirely certain why I was taking it, ballast against the ghost of Diana's voice possibly, or a simple concrete reminder that the world's most respected financial journalism had found something in me that my own father had spent 37 years looking directly past without registering. At 9 p.m. on December 23rd, my flight lifted out of Denver International and banked south over the suburban grid, the holiday lights of the city spreading below like a constellation that didn't know it was being left behind. And somewhere in that grid, my family was almost certainly reconstructing their grievances into a shared narrative in which I was playing the role of the selfish, irresponsible eldest daughter, a role I had been cast in so many times it had its own wardrobe. I spent the first 2 hours of the flight dissecting every clause of the Harlan contract, then somewhere over the dark expanse of Texas, set the briefing documents aside and opened the Forbes magazine instead. Page 47. The photograph of me, standing in my Rhino office with my arms crossed, and the Denver skyline filling the glass behind me, not performing confidence, but simply occupying it, the way you occupy a space you had a direct hand in building. The profile detailing 12 years of construction with the precision of a case study. 4 Fortune 500 executives quoted, describing the firm as operationally indispensable. And my family still thought I was searching for my professional footing. The lights of Miami appeared below as we began descent, a vast, luminous sprawl against the black Atlantic, a city with absolutely no interest in the history of what had brought anyone to its doorstep. And I felt the specific, clean clarity of a person who is exactly where they are supposed to be at exactly the right moment in their own life. The fountain blue was everything a high-stakes closing required. Art Deco authority in marble and warm brass, a lobby moving with the quiet energy of people who operated at consistent altitude, an oceanfront suite that looked out over the black water with the settled patience of a room that had hosted consequential decisions before. I checked in at 2 a.m., slept 6 hours with the clean, dreamless depth of someone whose conscience had nothing to answer for, and woke on December 24th to a phone displaying 11 unanswered notifications from Diana, Brooke, Grant, and numbers I correctly identified as family-adjacent contacts conscripted into the guilt management operation. I opened none of them. I dressed in the charcoal suit with the specific intentionality of someone moving into a defining professional confrontation, and at 10:30 a.m., the car delivered me to Harlan Tower in Brickell, a 40-story glass monolith that caught the December Miami sun and dispersed it in hard, brilliant refractions across the street below. The lobby receptionist issued a gold-trimmed VIP visitor badge. Miss Harlan is expecting you in the Sky Suite, 40th floor. The elevator ascent felt like a vertical crossing from one version of my professional life into the next. And then, somewhere between the 28th and 30th floors, my phone buzzed with a call from Brooke that I declined without pause, followed immediately by a voicemail notification that, against a judgment I knew was already outperforming itself, I pressed play. Avery, it's Brooke. None of the premium caterers in Denver will take a last-minute Christmas Eve booking. Dad has called in every favor he has, and nobody can produce a 25-person dinner on 6 hours' notice. And here's what you need to understand right now. Victoria Harlan is supposed to be at our house tonight for Grant's investor pitch, and we literally have nothing ready. This is entirely your fault. I stopped the recording at the one sentence that reorganized the internal architecture of everything. Victoria Harlan. The $3.8 billion client I was about to ask for a $2.1 million annual commitment had been invited to the Cole estate for a Christmas dinner that did not exist, because the invisible daughter had finally, permanently, stopped being invisible. The elevator arrived at 40. Biscayne Bay spread below in a morning panorama of blue and silver, and a woman in a tailored navy dress crossed the marble foyer. "Miss Cole? Miss Harlan is ready for you." I followed her through heavy oak double doors into a corner conference room where the Atlantic Ocean filled the entire southern wall through floor-to-ceiling glass, and Victoria Harlan stood at the head of a long obsidian table covered in organized legal documents and two uncapped Mont Blanc pens. A woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair cut into a razor-precise bob, and the quality of absolute stillness that comes from spending 20 years making rooms reorganize themselves around your presence without any visible effort. Her handshake was direct, unhesitating, and calibrated to communicate exactly as much as she intended it to. "Miss Cole, the reputation precedes you in the most compelling way." "The honor is entirely mine, Miss Harlan." She gestured to the chair across the table. "Let's proceed directly. I have a private flight this afternoon." The contract review proceeded for exactly 45 minutes, with the kind of precise pressure-tested professional engagement that I had spent 12 years building a firm specifically in order to be capable of sustaining. Victoria interrogating our Southeast market scalability, our vendor contingency protocols, our liability architecture and ESG compliance documentation, with the surgical attention of someone who had witnessed too many promising partnerships fail at the level of actual execution to accept anything less than complete transparency. I answered every line of examination from the grounded position of an executive who had spent 12 years building a firm specifically to withstand this level of scrutiny. And at 11:52 a.m., we both applied our signatures to the master service agreement, the Mont Blanc moving across the high bond paper with a sound I recognized in real time as something I would remember for the rest of my professional life. A corporate photographer captured the moment across the obsidian table, both of us in the specific posture of mutual professional recognition that cannot be manufactured by any amount of preparation. The Miami skyline filling the glass behind us like the visual punctuation of a sentence that had taken 12 years to write. Victoria's assistant notarized on the spot and presented my executed copy in a leather portfolio embossed with the Harlan Collective crest in gold that felt, in my hands, like the physical weight of something permanently earned. "Welcome to the Harlan Inner Circle, Avery," Victoria said, warmth moving through her expression with the specific quality of someone who respects, without reservation, what they are looking at. I have a strong instinct this will be one of the defining partnerships of the next several years. I couldn't agree more, I replied, and I meant every syllable with a precision that matched the Mont Blanc's line on the contract page. We exchanged a few minutes of industry conversation, and then Victoria reached for her Hermes briefcase. "I'm heading to Denver this afternoon," she mentioned with the ease of a calendar item. "Do you know a family called Cole? Grant runs a commercial real estate law practice. His younger daughter is apparently quite accomplished in the marketing space." My throat contracted around something dry and cold, but my professional expression held without a single degree of movement. "I've encountered the name in business circles," I said, my voice a clean, empty instrument carrying nothing extra. "Grant is a potential venture partner on a mountain corridor project we're evaluating. His wife extended an invitation to their Christmas gathering. I'm told the hospitality is exceptional." Exceptional. The dinner I was supposed to have spent 48 hours constructing from raw ingredients, which was currently a cold, empty kitchen and a handwritten basting schedule on a yellow Post-it sitting 3 hours north of where we were standing. She paused at the heavy oak doors and studied me with the evaluative attention of someone cross-referencing a data point against a pattern not yet fully assembled. "There's something striking about your profile, Avery. The name especially. Any connection to the Cole family in Denver?" This was the pivot point. I could have claimed it, could have watched the full, layered irony detonate across the face of one of the most powerful women in American real estate. But I didn't need that particular theater. I had the contract. That was the only architecture I came here to build. "It's a reasonably common name in the West," I said. Victoria nodded, the nod of a woman who recognized the dignity in someone choosing sovereignty over social leverage, and moved toward the elevator. If this story is hitting you the way it was living it, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now, and subscribe if you haven't already, because what comes next is everything. Now let's get back to Denver. I sat in the empty 40th floor conference room for a long time after she left, the signed portfolio in my hands, the Atlantic spreading beyond the glass with the patient indifference of a body of water that has been here longer than every human ambition in the room combined, allowing myself to fully inhabit what was about to unfold in Denver. Victoria Harlan had no idea that the exceptional hospitality she was flying toward was a ghost. No food prepared, no invisible daughter to produce the feast from nothing, no infrastructure except the hollow, decorative shell of a social brand sustained for 15 years entirely on labor it had never once acknowledged. The human part of me wanted to be present for the precise moment when that reality arrived in the Cole dining room. But a larger and more finely settled part of me felt nothing except the clean, terminal exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a weight for a very long time and has just, without drama or ceremony, put it down. I flew back to Denver that afternoon, rode an Uber Black directly to my loft, ordered green curry from the Thai restaurant 2 blocks from my building, opened a bottle of 2019 Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, put my phone on airplane mode, and spent Christmas Eve in the complete, sovereign silence of a life that belonged entirely to me for the first time in 15 years. I wouldn't learn the full anatomy of what Claire Whitmore would later describe as the Cole collapse until the morning of December 26th, but I pieced together the complete picture from her account with enough granular detail to reconstruct the scene with reasonable confidence. At 5:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Diana Cole walked into her professional-grade kitchen expecting the organized, warm evidence of 48 hours of invisible, reliable labor. Hors d'oeuvres staged in precise rows, a roast resting under silver foil, the familiar, productive quiet of her eldest daughter running the operational engine of the evening from the background where she had always run it. Instead, she found cold stainless steel, an empty cutting board, and a silence with its own acoustic quality. The silence of an absence whose removal exposed, with sudden, unambiguous clarity, exactly how much of the evening had depended on it. Grant appeared at the kitchen doorway, still adjusting his French cuffs, and when Diana said, "Where is the food? Where is Avery?" he had no answer. Because in 15 years of these dinners, it had never once occurred to either of them that the food didn't simply materialize by some domestic ambient force, that it was produced through specific hours of skilled labor performed by a specific person who had decided, for the first time in 15 years, that she had somewhere else to be. The following 60 minutes constituted a masterclass in the graceless panic of people who have never been required to solve a problem they created. Phone calls went to every premium catering service in the Denver metro area, all booked and closed for the holiday. And Grant leveraged 15 years of professional relationships against 3 five-star restaurant managers, none of whom could produce a 25-person dinner on 6 hours' notice on Christmas Eve, regardless of the name attached to the request. By 6 p.m., as the first Range Rovers and Mercedes sedans began pulling into the circular driveway, the Cole dining table, a custom 10-foot walnut piece that had hosted 15 years of elaborately constructed social performance, presented 2 store-bought rotisserie chickens in their plastic containers, 4 bags of pre-mixed Caesar salad, a cellophane-wrapped cheese board from a warehouse club, and a package of dinner rolls still sitting in the grocery bag. Claire Whitmore moved through the living room archway, surveyed the dining table with the careful, concerned attention of someone who has been a guest here long enough to understand the standard she was being measured against, and offered Diana a look that required no translation. "We had a logistical pivot with the primary vendor," Diana said, and the brittle precision of that sentence was the bravest social management she had ever attempted in a room full of people who could see through it from the doorway. At 7:15 p.m., Victoria Harlan entered the Cole estate, moving through the room with the gravitational authority of someone who has spent 2 decades being the most consequential person in every space she enters, shaking Grant's hand with professional warmth, exchanging a cordial nod with Diana, being introduced to Brooke as the firm's marketing talent, and then her gaze moved, with the practiced, undeceivable evaluation of a $3.8 billion operator, toward the dining room, where the rotisserie chickens sat in their plastic containers with the quiet, undeniable testimony of an operation that had failed at its most fundamental level. Her expression held its professional neutrality, but the neutrality of a woman like Victoria Harlan communicates its own verdict, and everyone in the room with the social calibration to read it received that verdict in real time. Then, at 7:42 p.m., Claire Whitmore made a sound that cut through every maintained conversation simultaneously. A sharp, involuntary intake of breath as she looked up from her phone with her expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and the specific quality of stunned social accounting that precedes a significant recalibration. "Grant! Diana! You need to see this right now," she said, her voice carrying the involuntary quality of genuine, unmanaged shock that cannot be contained by social training. She held up her phone, displaying the LinkedIn post that Harlan Collective's official communications account had published approximately 90 minutes earlier. a high-resolution photograph from the Miami Sky Suite of Victoria Harlan and Avery Cole, both holding the executed contract at the obsidian table, the Atlantic Ocean filling the glass behind them. The caption read, "Proud to announce a transformative national partnership with Meridian Group and its extraordinary founder, Avery Cole, redefining the standard for brand strategy in the American luxury market." "Is that your daughter?" Claire said, zooming in on the professional suit, the confident posture, the signed contract. The room's ambient conversation dropped to a complete, comprehensive silence. Grant leaned forward and looked at the image of his eldest daughter, standing in a 40-story glass building in Miami, the signed contract of the woman currently standing in his living room, held in her hands. And his mouth opened with no sound connected to it, the expression of a man whose entire internal taxonomy has just been invalidated. Diana stared at the screen with an expression that moved through disbelief into something more complex and more permanent. "What exactly is Meridian Group?" she said, and the question landed in the room with the hollow, mortifying resonance of something that should have been asked 12 years ago and was only being asked now because a public social reckoning had made the ignorance impossible to maintain. Victoria Harlan stepped forward and studied the photograph on Claire's phone with the slow, gathering expression of someone whose pattern recognition instincts were assembling a picture of considerable irony. "Meridian Group," she said, her voice dropping to the specific register she used when a financial review revealed something consequential, "is one of the most rigorously constructed brand strategy operations I have evaluated at any market level in the last several years. I finalized a $2.1 million annual exclusivity agreement with its founder this morning in Miami." The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound, but a structural event. A sudden, irreversible drop in atmospheric pressure that left the room feeling as though the oxygen had been systematically evacuated. Grant cleared his throat. $2.1 million, he repeated, with the careful, deliberate quality of a man parsing a legal term in a language he had only just realized he had been mispronouncing for a decade. "That exceeds our firm's total billings for the last 2 full quarters combined." Brooke set her wine glass on the side table with a precision that suggested she was actively managing the structural integrity of her hands. "Avery was in Forbes?" she said, and her voice carried the quality of a narrative collapsing inward on its own foundational assumptions. "She does brand consulting. She doesn't... How is that even..." "Forbes Brand Architects Power List, October issue," Claire said, already 3 screens deep into a LinkedIn search and entirely past the operational range of social management. 3-page profile, 23 full-time employees, over $4 million in audited annual revenue, 3 separate industry publication features this calendar year alone. The 25 guests, a cross-section of Denver's professional and social elite, people who had eaten at this table for years and absorbed 15 years of the Cole family's careful performance of superiority, began clustering around Claire's screen with the hushed, recalibrating energy of people updating a social map on which they had been operating with fundamentally incorrect coordinates. Richard Whitmore, who had been in the market for a brand architecture partner for a major project for 6 months, turned to Grant with an expression that had moved entirely out of the social register and into the professional. "Grant, I've been looking for exactly this caliber of firm for the better part of a year. Why was I never told your own daughter ran it?" Grant had no answer that could survive contact with the room, and he did not attempt to produce one. Victoria Harlan set her untouched wine glass on the sideboard with the quiet finality of a woman who has seen enough of a situation to reach a complete assessment. Reached for her Hermes briefcase and surveyed the dining room once more. The cellophane cheese board, the plastic containers, the grocery bag dinner rolls, with the composed expression of a woman who has built a $3.8 billion enterprise on the discipline of seeing situations exactly as they are. "Give your daughter my professional regards the next time you speak with her," she said. "And Grant, reach out to her office, not as a favor, as a professional courtesy she has more than earned." She crossed the foyer, and the front door's closing had the clean, irreversible quality of a verdict being entered into the permanent record. The gathering disintegrated in the specific graceless way of social events that have lost their structural reason to continue existing. Guests filing out in small, murmuring clusters, the conversation threading carefully around the Forbes profile and the secret empire daughter. Diana sank into the velvet armchair beside the empty fireplace and looked at the cellophane-wrapped cheese board on the 10-foot walnut table with the expression of a woman confronting, for the first time and without the protection of any available defense, the full, unedited record of her choices. Grant retreated to his study. Brooke ascended the stairs with the sound of designer heels on marble that told the story of someone in rapid private retreat from a social position that had just been permanently altered. In my low-high loft, I was none of these things. I was cross-legged on my minimalist sofa with a bowl of green curry and the Willamette Valley Pinot, watching the first serious snow of deep winter move silently across the city through floor-to-ceiling glass, my phone still in airplane mode, my Christmas Eve defined for the first time in 15 years, not by the heat of someone else's stove or the cold architecture of someone else's disappointment, but by the clean, sovereign silence of a life that had finally, fully arrived at its own address. On the morning of December 26th, Claire Whitmore called my direct office line, and the voice that came through was carrying a weight of genuine personal reckoning I had not heard from her in 15 years of social proximity. "Avery," she said, "I have been a guest in that house for 15 years, and I never once truly looked at who was standing behind the kitchen door. And I want you to know that what happened at that dinner was not just a social embarrassment for your family. It was a complete and overdue accounting of something that had been factually wrong for a very long time." I told her I hadn't done what I did for the accounting. I had done it for the firm. "I know," she said. "That's what made it so complete." The professional fallout moved through Denver's business community with the specific velocity of information that carries both social and financial weight simultaneously. Victoria Harlan's LinkedIn announcement had generated over 6,000 shares within 48 hours, reaching the feeds of national media outlets and Fortune 500 communications departments across multiple markets. Entrepreneur magazine sent a formal inquiry for a feature on the new architecture of American brand strategy, and my inbox became a structured catalog of expansion partnership opportunities and national media requests that mapped the precise outline of Meridian Group's 2025 National Growth Roadmap. The most unexpected piece of correspondence arrived on December 29th, a hand-delivered envelope addressed in Grant Cole's handwriting, which I recognized instantly from 15 years of seeing it on legal documents and birthday cards that arrived 3 days after the actual date. I didn't open it when it arrived. I made a double espresso, sat on my balcony with the cold air sharpening the edges of the morning into something clear and immediate, and held it in my hands for several minutes before I broke the seal. It was 2 pages of handwritten text on his personal stationery, in the careful, deliberate script of a man who had spent several days deciding whether to send it at all. Avery, I have spent the last 4 days in the kind of self-examination I should have undergone years ago, and didn't, because it would have required me to acknowledge something I found significantly more convenient to overlook. That while I was constructing a narrative around your sister, you were building something real, something documented, externally verified, and recognized by people with no personal stake in the outcome. And I missed every single chapter of it because I was too occupied with what was comfortable for me to look carefully at what was actually true. I read the Forbes profile in full. I looked up Meridian Group's complete client history. I called 2 of your references without identifying myself. I don't expect your forgiveness today. I have not done the work to earn it. But I want you to know that I see you now, not as the daughter who stayed in the kitchen because it made my evenings easier, but as someone who built something that surpassed everything I built, without a single structural advantage that I didn't give your sister by deliberate default. If you are ever willing to talk, I would like to hear about Meridian Group from the person who actually built it. Your father, Grant. I read it twice, folded it back along its original creases, and placed it in the bottom drawer with the Forbes magazine, not as a dismissal, but as a document that would require careful handling over time, a foundation that was not yet a structure, a beginning that would need to be built upon with the same methodical patience I had brought to everything else worth building in my life. On New Year's Eve, I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows and watched the fireworks break over the Denver skyline, painting the snow in arcs of gold and copper and cold electric blue. And at 11:47 p.m., with the city still building toward midnight, I dialed Grant's private number. He answered on the second ring, and the quality of the silence before he spoke told me more about the 13 days since Christmas Eve than any sentence could. "Avery," he said, "I wasn't certain you'd call." "I read the letter," I said. "It was a beginning. But if we're going to build anything forward from here, the terms are different from anything that existed before, and they are not negotiable." "Tell me," he said, and his voice had something I had never once heard from him when speaking directly to me. The full, undivided, genuine attention of someone who had finally decided to actually listen. "I am not the utility daughter anymore, and I will not perform that role in any configuration going forward. I attend family gatherings as a guest who has earned her seat and is recognized as such. Or I don't attend at all. Meridian Group is not a hobby, not a freelance project. It is a company, and it will be treated with the same respect and genuine curiosity this family has historically directed toward every achievement it considered worth acknowledging. And Diana needs to understand that her approval has never been the currency I was working toward, and it will not become that currency at any point in the future." The line held a long silence, and then Grant said quietly and without qualification, "We understand. We are ready to listen." The clock hit midnight. I hung up and stood in the light of the fireworks for another long moment, feeling the specific weight of a year ending without anything left to prove, and a new one beginning with the full, unencumbered architecture of a future I had built from the very first day, entirely on my own terms. I opened my MacBook, created a new strategic document, typed Meridian Group 2025 National Expansion Roadmap at the top, and began writing the next chapter of a company that had always known exactly what it was, even when no one else in the room was paying sufficient attention to see it. The greatest contract I ever signed was not the one with Victoria Harlan, executed at an obsidian table 40 floors above Biscayne Bay on Christmas Eve, though that one changed the national trajectory of everything I had built. The greatest contract was the one I signed with myself. Somewhere in the space between a basting schedule on a yellow Post-it and a $2.1 million closing in Miami. The one that said I would never again make myself small to fit the narrow architectural expectations of people who had chosen for 15 years not to look. Thank you for being here with me for this one. I'll see you in the next chapter. And before you go, if this story moved you, share it with someone in your life who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below telling me the one moment you stopped shrinking for someone else and stepped into the full weight of who you actually are. And subscribe to this channel right now so you are here when the next chapter drops. I promise you, it is worth the wait.